There are over 600 people on California death row. This is part 1 of the series. Douglas Stankiewicz, 46 years on death row. Stankiewicz was 19 when he shot Teresa Graybill, 22, in 1978. His death sentence was overturned by the state Supreme Court in 2008. He was resentenced to death in 2009, and that was overturned by the Ninth Circuit in 2012. He has since been awaiting a resentencing trial in Fresno County. James Anderson, 45 years on death row. Anderson kidnapped, robbed, and killed a woman and her grandmother whose car had stalled along an interstate. He was accused of, but never tried, for the killing of a third person. His sentence was overturned in 1987, but he was retried and again sentenced to death in 1991. David Gent, 45 years on death row. Gent raped and stabbed to death Patricia Burt, 25, in her house in 1979. He claimed a blackout from his service in Vietnam. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2002 set aside the sentence because of improper police interrogation. The Santa Clara County District Attorney decided in 2013 against seeking death, but a retrial is still pending. Earl Jackson, 45 years on death row. Jackson beat to death 2 elderly women, ages 81 and 90, and essayed one with a wine bottle during robberies of their adjoining apartments. The verdict was affirmed by the state Supreme Court in 1980, but a federal appellate panel vacated his sentence in 2008, and he was convicted again in 2010. Richard Montiel, 45 years on death row. After robbing an elderly woman, he robbed and murdered an elderly man who was at home alone during the day. His sentence was overturned, but he was resentenced in 1986. Fermin Ledesma, 44 years on death row. After a gas station attendant identified Ledesma as one of 2 men who had robbed the station, Ledesma returned and shot him to death. Jerry Bunyard, 43 years on death row. Bunyard asked Erlene Popham on November 1, 1979, to kill his pregnant wife Elaine so that he could be with another woman with whom he was having an affair. Popham received life with the possibility of parole. Michael Bergner, 43 years on death row. Bergner was convicted of murdering William Arias during a convenience store robbery. The state Supreme Court twice reversed his death penalty, but affirmed it in 2016 on the 3rd hearing. Jackson Daniels, 43 years on death row. After a series of crimes that included 10 bank robberies, carjackings, and the killing of a man during a drug robbery, Daniels crashed a stolen car during a police chase into another vehicle, killing the driver. He subsequently was shot 14 times in a shootout with the police, but survived. Daniels was paralyzed from the waist down after being shot by the police following a bank robbery. When 2 Riverside police officers came to the home where he was bedridden to take him to prison for the robbery, he shot and killed both of them. John Davenport, 43 years on death row. Davenport tortured and stabbed to death a woman he met at a bar, impaling her corpse on a stake. His death penalty was reversed but reinstated after a new sentencing trial. Oscar Gates, 43 years on death row. In 1979, Gates killed a fellow member of an Oakland forgery ring in a dispute over splitting their proceeds. Convinced he is the heir of Howard Hughes, who has been targeted by an elaborate conspiracy, he was declared mentally incompetent to proceed in his appeals until the U.S. Supreme Court struck down such indefinite stays. Jesse Gonzalez, 43 years on death row. Gonzalez killed a sheriff's deputy and fired at another as officers raided a house during a narcotics investigation. Joe Johnson, 43 years on death row. Johnson crept into an apartment and killed the occupant, hitting the sleeping man in the head with a barbell. 2 days later, he essayed a woman in a church. His death penalty was reversed, and he was retried and condemned a second time. Eric Kimball, 43 years on death row. Kimball killed the owners of a stereo equipment store at their home, then used their keys to enter and ransack that store. Jarvis Masters, 43 years on death row. Masters was part of a conspiracy in which San Quentin State Prison inmates attacked and killed a guard. The inmate who did the stabbing was sentenced to life without parole. Ward Weaver, 43 years on death row. Weaver killed an 18-year-old Air Force recruit and his girlfriend after encountering them on the highway in a disabled car. Willie Brenner, 42 years on death row. Brenner, or James Willis Johnson, killed the owner of a jewelry store during a robbery with two other accomplices. Albert Brown, 42 years on death row. Brown waylaid a 15-year-old girl as she walked to school, essayed her and then strangled her to death, then made phone calls to police to give clues to where her body could be found. 3 years before, he essayed a 14-year-old girl. Ronald Deere, 42 years on death row. Despondent over a breakup, Deere killed his girlfriend's brother and the man's two children. Melvin Fort, 42 years on death row. In 1981, he gunned down a German tourist, and a year later he shot a woman and killed her fiancé. He was in prison when the cases were solved 3 decades later based on DNA found on the ring of the deceased tourist. Philip Lucero, 42 years on death row. He essayed and killed 2 girls, 7 years old and 10 years old, who had walked through his backyard on the way to a park. William Payton, 42 years on death row. Payton essayed and murdered a woman at the boarding house where he had lived with his wife and attempted to murder another woman and her son with a butcher knife, stabbing them more than 60 times. Craig Ross, 42 years on death row. Ross and Stephen Champion killed a man and his 14-year-old son during the robbery of the victim's home. That evening, they robbed a nearby apartment, essaying a woman inside and killing her brother. Ross was convicted of 3 murders, Champion of 2. Ricardo Sanders, 42 years on death row. During the robbery of a Bob's Big Boy restaurant, Sanders and accomplices killed 4 victims. Keith Adcox, 41 years on death row. Adcox and a friend, camping in the woods without money, killed a fisherman to steal his money and car. Kevin Cooper, 41 years on death row. After escaping from a prison camp, Cooper killed 4 people sleeping in a house in which he was hiding and used a hatchet to dismember some of the bodies. A mother, father, daughter, and a boy from the neighborhood were killed. A son survived having his throat slit. Cooper continues to maintain his innocence. Douglas Mikey, 41 years on death row. Seeking revenge on an old acquaintance, Mikey returned from a military base in Japan and robbed and murdered a man and his 18-year-old girlfriend. Michael Morales, 41 years on death row. To get revenge on the woman who competed with his cousin for the attention of another boy, Morales attempted to strangle her with his belt until it broke. He beat her repeatedly on the head with a hammer, dragged her body to a field and essayed her, and finally stabbed her 4 times in the chest to ensure she was dead. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.